Till now we have seen what the First World War actually was, how it was first, and how it involved the entire world. But can a war of such huge impact be caused by a single incident? The answer to that is yes and no. How exactly? Well, every war is triggered by a single incident. And why am I calling it a trigger? Because just like a gun has a trigger which fires, similarly an incident causes a war to break out. But every trigger only fires when the gun is loaded. Similarly, the First World War might have been broken out by a single incident, but there were multiple socio-economic and political factors which pushed the world to an edge, a point of no return. And all it needed then was just a push. So now, aren't you curious as to what these factors really were? What caused the world to fight the deadliest of wars it has ever encountered? Let us now dive deep into the causes of the First World War. Starting off with the causes, we have the rise of aggressive nationalism. Now, nationalism, this is a word we all have encountered, but mostly in a positive sense. After all, it is nationalism and the rise of nationalism which helped us shape the Indian independence movement. Then, how does a sentiment like nationalism cause a war? And that too, no nominal war. This is a world war we're talking about. Let us now understand this question by actually understanding what nationalism is. See, nationalism, quite simply put, is the feeling of love and loyalty towards one's own country. Now, is this not the definition of patriotism as well? Well, patriotism and nationalism both refer to the love towards one's country. But patriotism is a general love, whereas nationalism is more specific, perhaps love towards the culture of their own country or language. And this specificity has the tendency to be weaponized. What do I mean by weaponized? Misused in the wrong hands. And this tendency makes nationalism aggressive. Now, why is aggression of a sentiment like nationalism bad? Well, understand this quite simply. While patriot loves his country and is proud of it for what the country does, a nationalist is loving his country and proud of his country no matter what it does. That is why nationalism in its aggressive form is a cause of war. Now, what is aggressive nationalism then? Well, aggressive nationalism is a feeling where one considers their own country above all countries, which means that their country's interests are superior to any other interest of any other country. Now that we've understood what aggressive nationalism is, let us understand how aggressive nationalism was brewing a war in Europe. So by the 20th century, big European countries, by which I mean Germany, France, or Britain, they had started showcasing themselves as the best. They believed that their country's economy, military strength, or in politics as well, was better than any other country in the entire world. Now, isn't this overconfidence? Well, what this overconfidence does is make them extremely competitive. After all, they all believe that there can be only one best. So what, apart from aggressive nationalism making people competitive, it also makes them blind to the faults of their own nation, which means that they believe that in terms of global competition or in terms of economy or even aggression, their country is fair, righteous, and beyond any fault. This means that no matter what a country does, as long as it is done to prove that their country is superior, it is justified. Even war is justified. Now, we have all heard the saying that all is fair in love and war. But over here we see love, aggressive love for one's own country justify or even make war look fair. Isn't that interesting? So all these things actually make an aggressive nationalist narrow-minded, which means that they can only see everything through this lens of narrow-mindedness. And this narrow-mindedness makes them competitive in patriotism as well. By which I mean that not only are they now saying that their country is better than the other country, now they're even competing amongst each other to show who loves their country more. This sense of narrow-mindedness and competitive patriotism is best seen in the Balkan region, something we will discuss when we go on with the other causes of war. But then, don't take my word for it. I might be a commoner. Let us hear from Nobel Prize winning physicist Albert Einstein. Let us see what he has to say about nationalism and its dark turns. Now, it's important to be mentioned that Albert Einstein himself had faced such aggressive nationalism, about which we will read when we study the rise of Nazism in Germany before the Second World War. So what is it that Albert Einstein says about nationalism? He says that nationalism, in my opinion, is nothing more than idealistic rationalization for militarism and aggression. Quite simply put, what he's saying is nationalism justifies aggression and the arming of weapons, or nationalism justifies war. Now, this we can best see, as we will see, that how the nations are competing amongst each other into arming themselves and also into getting more territories and just justifying it by saying it's national defense, and how this competition is causing the war. But then, what has the capability to weaponize or to expand the impact of a sentiment like nationalism? After all, what can do such a thing? Well, look around you. Look at how your parents pay attention to news. They often listen to the news as if that's the only information that is correct, and we often shape our opinions based on what the news provides us. And why is that? Well, as we all know, news and media are supposed to be credible and are never supposed to take a side. But is that always the case? Now look at this picture. What do you think is happening over here? Well, over here, we can see that the media is spoon-feeding a common man. A person who is spoon-fed has no control over what they are being fed, no matter even if it's nationalist propaganda. So what would have been the case if the media of that time was actually nationalist? That's exactly what happened before the First World War. So Nationalist Press, before 1914, spread the ideals of aggressive nationalism to its readers throughout the country. They created a situation where the people felt that their country is at a threat of being invaded, or the country's interests are at a threat of being violated by the other countries through their scheming and their plotting. Now this made the people even more sympathetic towards their own country and extremely critical or against the other countries. So the nationalist press did not do what the press is supposed to do. Instead, they acted as per the government wanted. Now, why are people falling for this? Well, because they already are afraid. The fear already is in their hearts that they might be invaded or they might lose their homes. This fear, which already was existing in the hearts of people, this found even more substantiation or even expanded more because of the press reportage. Now this manipulation of people into believing what is right and how their country is always fair, this manipulation is called nationalist propaganda. But the question might come up, what actually is propaganda? Well, let me paint a picture. Let's say you ran in a race and you came last. However, there were only 2 participants, yourself included. So you conveniently came back home and told your friends and family that you came second. Now, by saying that, are you factually incorrect? You are not. Are you morally correct? Absolutely not. So what you actually are doing is that you are withholding the most crucial information, which is that there were only two participants. And by that, you're manipulating the situation itself, and you're also managing to get praise from your family and friends. Well, congratulations, my friend, you have created propaganda for yourself. Now, as morally incorrect as propaganda might be, we see propaganda all around us. Toothpaste tell us that they have some special herbal ingredients in them, or politicians use some racist slogans in their speeches. So similarly, propaganda is all around us. So what did we understand till now? Well, propaganda is the manipulation of information. Why? So that we can influence the opinion of the people. So nationalist propaganda, especially of this time, let the people learn only what their governments wanted them to know. But why are people falling for propaganda? Well, if we can fall for propaganda, then imagine the people of that time always living in the fear of being invaded by the neighboring countries, their homes being bombed, or waking up to troops marching by them with huge machines of war. This creates fear, and men are inherently a fearful lot. So now this fear often becomes a victim of nationalist propaganda, which means that this fear feeds off, and this nationalist propaganda preys on the fear. Now that we understood what propaganda is, do you wish to see some examples of propaganda? Well, in this period, propaganda was mostly in the form of printed materials, especially because printer technology was at its height during this period. So before we see some examples, I want you to answer this question. The manipulation of information to change public opinion is known as option 1 journalism, option 2 politics, option 3 propaganda, option 4 nationalism. The correct answer is propaganda. So now let's see some examples of propaganda. This poster right here is a British anti-German propaganda. So what are we seeing in this? We are seeing the Germans being portrayed as barbarians. Germans are coming into the villages of the British people, and they are killing their family members, they're burning their houses. And how do we know that these are Germans? Well, we can see the German helmet right here, which shows that these are German soldiers. So this kind of propaganda was made to create fear in the hearts of people by saying, will you fight now or will you wait for this? Such propaganda posters used to increase army recruitment during the war. Well, now that we saw the British propaganda, let's see some American propaganda. So this poster is known as Destroy the Mad Brute, Enlist. It was a US enlistment poster, again made to increase army recruitment. So over here, the German soldier, Germany itself, is being portrayed as a savage brute, as a wild animal. And again we can see the typical helmet. And over here we see that Germany has already left behind a destroyed Europe, and now it has crossed the Atlantic to come over to America. And now it's America's turn to be destroyed until and unless Americans respond to the war call. And over here we can see Lady Liberty herself at the risk of being defiled. So this is an American propaganda. And finally, let's see an Austro-Hungarian propaganda. Over here we see an Austro-Hungarian soldier who is trying to save himself or trying to fight against all the allied powers. It shows how powerful the Austro-Hungarian soldier is, that he is able to resist all these attacks. This map itself is a propaganda material. Over here we see all the countries of Europe being shown as caricatures. It's a German propaganda, so of course Germany and Austria are shown as soldiers trying to fight against these caricatured European powers. So this is the impact of propaganda, and this is how propaganda and aggressive nationalism can cause a war, as people who already are afraid are feeding into these forms of propaganda materials, and aggressive nationalism is seeping into their hearts. So what did we see till now? We saw that every war is caused by a single incident, but that cause itself is backed by numerous socio-economic and political factors. Then we saw the first cause of the First World War, which is aggressive nationalism. We saw what the difference between nationalism and patriotism is. We also understood how nationalism has a tendency to turn aggressive. Then we saw how nationalism spread throughout Europe and how nationalism was feeding into the fears of people. Then we saw the role propaganda plays in the rise of nationalism, and we saw numerous instances of propaganda to better understand what propaganda actually is. In the next video, we will look at the other causes of the First World War.